The Immortal Rules. Chapter 2. People will tell you that it's impossible to leave New Covington, that the outer wall is impenetrable, that no one can get in or out of the city even if they wanted to. People are wrong. The Fringe is a massive concrete jungle. Crowns of broken glass and rusting steel. Skeletal giants choked by vines, rot, and corrosion, save for the very center of the city, where the looming vampire towers gleam with dark radiance. The surrounding structures look diseased, hollow, and perilously close to collapse. Below the jagged skyline, with few humans to keep it in check, the wilderness outside creeps closer. Rusted shells of what were once cars are scattered about the streets, their rotted frames wrapped in vegetation. Trees, roots, and vines push up through sidewalks and even rooftops, splitting pavements and steel as nature slowly claims the city for its own. In recent years, a few of the looming skyscrapers finally succumbed to time and decay, tumbling to the ground in a roar of dust and cement and breaking glass, killing everyone unlikely enough to be around it when it happened. It was a fact of life anymore. Enter any building nowadays, and you could hear it creaking and groaning above your head, maybe decades away from collapse, or maybe only seconds. The city is falling apart. Everyone in the Fringe knows it, but you can't think about that. No use in worrying about what you can't change. What I was worried about, more than anything, was avoiding the vamps, not getting caught, and getting enough to eat to survive one more day. Sometimes, like today, that called for drastic measures. What I was about to do was risky and dangerous as hell, but if I was worried about risk, I wouldn't be unregistered, would I? The Fringe was divided into several sectors as they called them, all neatly fenced off to control the flow of food and people. Another device built for our protection. Call it what you want. A cage is still a cage. As far as I know, there are 5 or 6 sectors in a loose semicircle around the inner city. We were Sector 4. If I had a tattoo that could be scanned, it would read something like, Allison Sakamoto, resident number 7229, Sector 4, New Covington, property of Prince Zalazar. Technically, the prince owned every human in the city, but his officers had harems and thralls, blood slaves of their own as well. Fringers, on the other hand, registered Fringers anyway, were communal property, which meant any vamp could do anything they wanted to them. No one in the Fringe seemed bothered by their tattoo. Nate, one of the assistants at Hurley's trading post, was constantly trying to get me to register, saying the tattooing didn't even hurt very much, and the whole blood-giving part wasn't so bad once you got used to it. He could understand why I was being so stubborn. I told him it wasn't the scanning or the giving blood that I hated the most. It was the whole property of bit that bothered me. I was no one's property. If the damn bloodsuckers wanted me, they'd have to catch me first, and I wasn't going to make it easy for them. The barrier between sectors was simple. Chain link topped with barbed wire. The steel curtains ran for miles and weren't well patrolled. There were guards at the iron gates in each sector that let the food trucks in and out of the inner city, but nowhere else. Really, the vamps didn't particularly care if some of their cattle slipped back and forth between sectors. The majority of the deadly, lethal force was dedicated to protecting the outer wall every night. You had to admit, the outer wall was pretty impressive. 30 feet high, 6 feet thick. The ugly monstrosity of iron, steel, and concrete loomed over the perimeter of the Fringe, surrounding the entire city. There's only one gate to the outside, 2 doors of solid iron, barred from the inside with heavy steel girders that took 3 men to remove. It wasn't in my sector, but I'd seen it open once, while scavenging from home. Spotlights had been placed along the wall every 50 yards, scanning the ground like enormous eyes. Beyond the wall was the kill zone, a raised strip of ground littered with barbed wire coils, trenches, spiked pits, and mines, all designed to do one thing, keep rabbits away from the wall. The outer wall was feared and hated throughout New Covington, reminding us that we were trapped here, like penned-in sheep, but it was greatly revered as well. No one could survive the ruins beyond the city, especially when darkness fell. Even the vamps disliked going to the ruins, Beyond the walls, the night belonged to the rabbits. No sane person went over the wall, and those who tried were either gunned down or blown to bits in the kill zone, which was why I planned to go beneath. I pushed my way through the waist-high weeds that filled the ditch, keeping one hand on the cement wall as I maneuvered puddles and shattered glass. I hadn't been here in a while, and the weeds had covered all traces of previous passing. Circling the rock pile, ignoring the suspicious-looking bones scattered about the base, I counted a dozen steps from the edge of the rubble, stopped, and knelt down in the grass. I brushed away the weeds, careful not to disturb the surroundings too much. I didn't want anyone knowing this was here. If the vampires heard rumors that there was a possible exit out of their city, they would have every square inch of the fringe searched until it was found and sealed tighter than a pet's hold on the food warehouse key. Not that they were terribly concerned about people getting out. There was nothing beyond the outer wall except ruins, wilderness, and rabbits. But exits were also entrances, and every few years a rabbit would find its way into the city via the tunnels that ran beneath, and there would be chaos and panic and death until the rabbit was killed and the entry was found and blocked off. But they always missed this one. The weeds parted, revealing a circle of black metal sunk into the ground. It was insanely heavy, but I kept a piece of rebar nearby to pry it open. Letting the cover thump onto the grass, I gazed into a long, narrow hole. The rusty metal bars were set into the cement tube beneath the cover, leading down into the darkness. I glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then started down the ladder. It always worried me, leaving the tunnel entrance wide open, but the cover was too heavy for me to slide back once inside the tube. But it was well hidden in the long grass, and no one had discovered it yet, not in all the years of me sneaking out of the city. Still, I couldn't dawdle. Dropping to the cement floor, I gazed around, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Putting a hand on my coat pocket, I closed it around my two most prized possessions: a lighter, still half full of fluid, and my pocket knife. The lighter I'd found on my previous trip into the ruins. The knife I'd had for years. Both were extremely valuable, and I never went anywhere without them. As usual, the tunnels beneath the city reeked. The old-timers, the ones who had been kids in the time before the plague, said that all the city's waste was once carried away through the pipes under the streets, instead of in buckets emptied into covered holes. If that was true, then it certainly explained the smell. About a foot from where I stood, the lodge dropped away into sludge-black water, trickling lazily down the tunnel. A huge rat, nearly the size of some of the alley cats I glimpsed topside, scurried off into the shadows, reminding me why I was here. With one last glance through the hole at the sky, still sunny and bright, I headed into the darkness. People used to think rabbits lurked underground, in caves or abandoned tunnels, where they slept during the daylight hours and came out at night. Actually, most everyone still thought that, but I'd never seen a rabbit down here. Not once. Not even a sleeping one. That didn't mean anything, however. No one topside had ever seen a mole man, but everyone knew the rumors of diseased, light-shy humans living beneath the city, who would grab your ankles from storm drains and drag you down to eat you. I hadn't seen a mole man either, but there were hundreds, maybe thousands of tunnels I'd never explored, and didn't plan to. My goal, whenever I ventured into this dark, eerie world, was to get past the wall and back up to the sunlight as quick as possible. Luckily, I knew the stretch of tunnel. It wasn't completely lightless. Sunlight filtered in from grates and storm drains, little bars of color in an otherwise gray world. There were places where it was pitch black, and I had to use my lighter to continue, but the spaces were familiar, and I knew where I was going, so it wasn't terrible. Eventually, I wiggled my way out of a large cement tube that emptied into a weed-choked ditch, almost sliding on my stomach to get through the pipe. Sometimes there were perks to being very skinny. Wringing nasty warm water from my clothes, I stood up and gazed around. Over the rows of dilapidated roofs, past the barren raised fields of the kill zone, I could see the outer wall rising up in its dark, deadly glory. For some reason, it always looked strange from this side. The sun hovered between the towers in the center of the city, gleaming off their mirrored walls. There were still a few good hours left to hunt, but I needed to work fast. Past the kill zone, sprawled out like a gray-green suburban carpet, the remains of the old suburbs waited for me in the fading afternoon light. I vaulted up the bank and slipped into the ruins of a dead civilization. Scavenging the ruins was tricky. They say there used to be massive stores that had rows and rows of food, clothes, and all kinds of other things. They were enormous and easily identified by their wide, sprawling parking lots. But you didn't want to look there, because they were the first to be picked clean when everything went bad. Nearly 60 years after the plague, the only thing left behind were gutted-out walls and empty shelves. The same was true of smaller food marts and gas stations. Nothing was left. I'd wasted many hours searching through the buildings to come up empty-handed every time, so now I don't bother. But the normal residents, the rows of rotting, dilapidated houses along the crumbling streets, were a different story. Because here's something interesting I've learned about the human race. We like to hoard. Call it stockpiling. Call it paranoia. Call it preparing for the worst. The houses were far more likely to have food stashed away in cellars or buried deep in closets. You just had to ferret it out. The floorboards creaked as I eased through the door of my fifth or sixth hopeful, a 2-story house surrounded by a warped chain-link fence and nearly swallowed up by ivy. Windows broken, porch strangled under vines and weeds. The roof and part of the upper floor had fallen in. The faint rays of light filtered through the rotten beams. The air was thick with the smell of mold, dust, and vegetation, and the house seemed to hold its breath as I stepped inside. I searched the kitchen first, rummaging through cupboards, opening drawers, even checking the ancient refrigerator in the corner. Nothing. A few rusty forks, an empty tin can, a broken mug, all stuff I'd seen before. In one bedroom, the closets were empty, the dresser overturned, a large oval mirror shattered on the floor. The blankets and sheets had been stripped from the bed, and a suspicious dark blot stained one side of the mattress. I didn't wonder what it might be. You don't wonder about things like that. You just move on. In the second bedroom, which was not quite as ravaged as the first, an old crib stood in the corner. Filmy and covered in cobwebs, I eased around it, deliberately not looking inside the peeled bars to the once white shelves on the wall. A shattered lamp stood on one shelf, but beneath it, I saw a familiar, dust-covered rectangle. Picking it up, I wiped away the film and cobwebs, scanning the title at the top. "Good night, Moon," it read, and I smiled ruefully. I wasn't here for books, and I needed to remember that. If I brought this home instead of, say, food, Lucas would be furious, and we'd probably fight about it again. Maybe I was being too hard on him. It wasn't that he was stupid, just practical. He was more concerned with survival than learning a skill that was useless in his eyes. But I couldn't give up just because he was being stubborn. If I could get him to read, maybe we could start teaching other fringers, kids like us. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start something. I didn't know what, but there had to be something better than just survival. I tucked the book under my arm, filled with a new resolve, when a soft clink made me freeze. Something was in the house with me, moving around just outside the bedroom door. Very carefully, I laid the book back on the shelf without disturbing the dust. I'd come back for it later, if I survived whatever was coming. Slipping my hand into my pocket, I gripped my knife and slowly turned. Shadows moved through the sickly light coming from the living room, and the faint tapping steps echoed just outside the doorway. I flipped the knife blade open and stepped backwards, pressing myself against the wall and the dresser, my heart thudding against my ribs. As a dark shape paused just outside the door, I heard slow, labored panting and held my breath. A deer stepped into the frame, my gut and throat unclenched, though I didn't immediately relax. Wildlife was common enough in the city ruins, though why a deer would be wandering around a human house, I don't know. Straightening, I blew out a slow breath, causing the doe to jerk her head up, peering in my direction, as if she couldn't quite see what was there. My stomach growled, and for a moment, I had visions of sidling up to the deer and plunging the blade into her neck. You almost never saw meat of any kind in the fringe. Rat and mouse were highly prized, and I've seen nasty, bloody fights over a dead pigeon. There were a few stray dogs and cats running around the fringe, but they were wild, vicious creatures that, unless you wanted to risk an infected bite, were best left alone. The guards also had leave to shoot any animal found wandering around the streets, and usually did.